Hi folks, Andy here from Andy McSweeney Photography and Photo Tour Bruges. Want to talk to you about the Fujifilm 23mm LMWR-OIS wide-angle lens for the Fujifilm GFX system. It is a 18mm equivalent lens if we're talking full frame numbers, and frankly it'll be your default option on the wide-angle side of things if you are a GFX user, because it's the only wide-angle that Fujifilm make right now. So let's just jump into it. We've got a beautiful afternoon here in Bruges, so why would I waste some time? And you're probably here for the facts and my thoughts. Well, as opening thoughts, I gotta say, I like this lens. I think it does a lot of good. I am a wide-angle shooter by nature, and I like what I see as far as this goes. I will say initially that I wished it was a little bit wider, because frankly 16mm on the full frame is totally my bag. So this being 18 equivalent, there were a couple of situations that I thought it could be a little wider, and that was particularly in a lot of the situations that I used this lens for. Landscapes, architecture, particularly client work where I really want to get everything in, and I know I'm going to be doing some corrections with the architecture. This lens delivered, but with just the caveat that I wouldn't mind if it was a little wider. Having said all that and gotten some bitching and complaining over in the first minute, let's talk about the handling and build quality, which I think, frankly, like everything in the GFX system, is pretty exceptional. We've got the weather sealing, we've got the metal body, we've got all kinds of good optics going on. There's no cheap or crappy feeling here at all. When you look at the aperture ring and give it a turn, you're going to notice that the aperture dials are clicking solidly and the way they should. Same goes, except without the clicking, of course, for the focus dial. I think it's nice, smooth, and never really interrupts or feels any jags or lags. And just in my hand, especially paired up with the 50S, I think it's got a really good feel to it. It's well balanced. I'd be curious to try it on Fujifilm's new GFX50R, which is a little more rangefinder, compact, lighter weight side of things. And yeah, I think it works out well. I will also say, just before we get into the optics and everything else, that we actually have an 82mm filter ring, which I think is absolutely wonderful, because this is a very standard number as far as filter sizes go. So if I'm picking this up, I don't have to pick up a whole new set of neutral density, polarizing, or even just UV filters to protect this guy or do any of the fancy filtering tricks that I'm thinking of. So all around, really like just how it's laid out and everything else. There are no real switches and dials to talk about, so we don't have to dwell there. And that means, gang, we can just move on to the optics, which frankly are pretty exceptional. Again, GFX for this kind of system and this kind of price point, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Images are contrasty, sharp, really tack sharp in fact. And while there is a little bit of distortion, that's just the nature of this kind of focal length, I find it's pretty well controlled, and when you have to do corrections afterwards, undo that distortion if you will, it's all very smooth and there's no weird mustaches or curves that feel like they're unusual or difficult to correct. So even just working with that slider in Lightroom on distortion control, I was able to fix out the images as I needed them. So good, very good in fact, really nice. The build, the optics, it's all coming together. Next to that, there isn't so much you can talk about, until we get to the end with the images and everything else. But I will say, I don't know, just the autofocus speed, this is a pretty fast focusing autofocus lens. I'm going to blame that bird for that stutter. I guess he got off on the autofocus too. But yeah, like I was saying, the autofocus is quite acceptable on this. It might even verge into speedy. With a wide angle lens, generally they catch autofocus a little quicker than the telephoto. But I think it'll be a long-term question on what this can really deliver as far as autofocus goes, because frankly with the GFX50s, and even with the 50R, this is all first generation technology sitting in the body, even if the lens has been built for the next generation. And Fujifilm have actually announced that the 100S is going to be coming out in 2019, and apparently it's going to have a lot of improvements with autofocus and a whole bunch of other features. So I think with the autofocus bumping up, I'm going to say it's really good, and I'm curious what will happen on the future iterations of the GFX system. So lots of bang here, folks. You know, I'm going to show you some images at the end. In fact, I think we might even dip into Lightroom and we can poke at some of those images in detail. But overall, from the 2 uses I've had of this lens back in summer 2018 here in Bruges, and right now here winter of 2019 in Bruges, it's been about 5 weeks in total that I've got to play with this thing, and I've been absolutely delighted. Very, very few issues, and, you know, frankly, any of the issues I noticed were probably more down to the photographer than the camera on this one. So, really top marks, Fujifilm. Nice to see you walk into the wide-angle side of things with power and pizzazz, and, well, if I'm going to buy into the GFX system, this will probably be the first lens that I'll be considering, especially being a wide-angle shooter. Okay, gang, I think that's what I have for this particular lens on the Fujifilm GF23mm LMWROIS. I practiced it enough, I get to say it twice, and yes, it's an f4, so boom to that. Oh, and before we get out of here, one more thing on the image quality. How ridiculous I didn't mention it when it was time. The Bokeh or Bokeh, or just that fuzzy background that you get going on when you drop your depth of field. It's absolutely luscious on this one. From f4 all the way through to f32, I didn't see anything jagged, nervous, or make me wonder why would I pay 2,500–3,000 euros for this lens with Bokeh like that. That's part of where that price tag is showing up. So don't forget the Bokeh. All right, that's what I have for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Andy McSweeney of Andy McSweeney Photography and Photo Tour Bruges. If you are in the beautiful city of Bruges, whether there's snow on the ground or not, or in the air, feel free to join me as Photo Tour Bruges. I do open tours, private tours daily. It is a photo tour for all photographers, so whether you show up with your medium format, with your full frame, with your APS-C, or hey, even send grandma with the smartphone, or even bring your smartphone along because you're traveling light, it is a tour for all photographers. Take a look down in the description. You'll see a nice little promo code for 15% off all tours. And of course, if it's for a private tour, just mention this video when you do your booking. All right, I'm out of here. A couple days left with this, and still some snow on the ground in Bruges. Ladies and gentlemen, get out there and get shooting. See ya. Okay, folks, looking into Lightroom, we have a bunch of images to get through, so let's just crack in, shall we? I want to start on the portrait side of things of what the GF23mm delivers. This is Mayor Dirk de Vouw, who was kind enough to make time for a portrait session, and I jumped in there with the 23mm. You can see how all the distortion is extremely well controlled, and, you know, the results are really popping out. If we zoom in on Dirk, and you can notice ISO 800 here, things are looking real sharp and crisp, especially considering that little ISO bump. So off the top, everything's working like it should. I should also emphasize that unless I mention otherwise, that these are all single RAWs. So I'm just, when we look into the editing side of things, pushing around the RAW a little bit, applying a film simulation as I feel, in this case, Pro Neg Standard, because it's just nice and like I like it. And well, gang, you know, as a portrait lens, the 23mm I think you'll find will deliver. You can see John, aka the Waffle Man, on the Brugge, aka Articello Gelateria. This is also where the 23mm will be an interesting lens. You can see how the drop in depth of field at f4 really kicked in pleasantly, and you know, the Bokeh is very, very, very pleasant, like we'll talk about in a bit. But sticking on the portrait side of things, Stephanie from Blackbird kindly made time for a portrait last year, and you can see, guys, I mean, just again, picking an area Let's save Stephanie the zoom up to the face. Look at that definition and clarity that's coming through on the 23mm. I mean, this is really popping in so many ways. And detail-wise, I'm getting everything I need. So very pleased on what the 23mm is delivering. And again, as a portrait lens during the Costumes de Bruges, this worked out a treat. Again, that f4 setting, you know, for a medium format, you'll certainly see the drop in depth of field, even on the wide angle like a 23mm. And it's extremely pleasant, like I think that background of Bruges is showing you. Same goes for that private photo session. You know, that worked out real well, especially with the snow. And I was super happy to have the 23mm there. Just, again, you know, to get that nice, sharp, rich clarity I'm looking for. And being able to count on low distortion and everything else coming together. So very nice as a portrait lens. Not too bad as a street lens either. I'm very much a wide angle shooter, so I'm extremely pleased when I have my wide on the street. And you can see, again, crispness, clarity, everything working out almost to a fault on how sharp it is. And when I'm at, what, f4.5, but I have a little distance, the depth of field, of course, is still going to fill in. So very flexible lens, extremely pleasant when you get to the landscape side of things. I mean, especially by the béguinage, when the swan just jumps right in front of your shot, you can know you have it in kind of Leica-like quality and crispness. I mean, you can see how this is really popping out of the frame here, guys. And then moving through interiors, you can see again, just really delivering what I need. I hope you're also noticing that this extremely low distortion going on. And just to prove what's going on there, as far as distortion, I haven't touched that, you know? So no profile fixes, nothing on the slider. It is going to pop up on occasion, but this lens delivers extremely low distortion in most cases. So very pleased. And again, here at Exceller Bikes, just where the 23mm lets me drop the depth of field. And as I mentioned in the review, makes a half-decent macro lens. So very interesting on that. You can get quite close on the focus, and I think that certainly is an asset to this lens. There we are at Café Vlessinga during summer where they pop flowers on their old furnace. And again, 23mm, nice up close, popping. And this one handheld at 1600 ISO, you know, I'm still getting this amazing clarity and sharpness that I can very much work with. And just to give you a peek on the sliders, highlights down, clarity up, and a film standard, I'm on my way. So even though this is a very sharp and contrasty lens, you know, you definitely have a lot to work with. And again, getting up close, dropping the depth of field. I mean, this is where medium format, you go up to f13 and you're still getting, you know, a nice softness to the background. So delivers on that side of things. And when we go into the, you know, corners of it, or excuse me, just into the edges where the bokeh is, it's extremely pleasant bokeh. Even at a higher number like f13, that could be dangerous in some people's technical opinion. Macro up close there at David DeGraff's little B&B above his studio at Bonifacius Bridge. Outdoors on the landscape, very pleasant lens to use. Like I said, very low distortion, lots and lots of real crisp and clear goodness, and low distortion overall makes me a very happy man. You know, when I'm wandering around Bruges doing my photo tours, sometimes I'm shooting a little bit on the fly because I'm worrying more about your photos than mine, and it's very nice that this lens produces an extremely low distortion. There's another example. And another. And another around this beautiful city of Bruges. And another. And then getting low with it. And then zooming in just to remind you how crisp and clear and sharp across the range this lens is. It's at that f8 sweet spot that I find works best on many a lens. One more landscape. And maybe another. And one more, with a little bit of the recent melting ice from the snow in Bruges. And gang, just on the landscape side of things, because that's where I really got off on this lens, I enjoyed what it did. It wasn't just the low distortion factor. It was the fact that, being able to pop this onto a medium format sensor, this final image over of this beautiful little house actually starts like that. So to get rid of the parallax effect, I know as an architectural photographer, I'm going to be doing some fixes, some corrections and all that kind of thing. To have the sharpness, crispness of the 23mm is obviously an asset. And then on medium format, when we go down to transform and see the vertical is taken to -46. So let's just reset that baby real quick. Look at that. That's the original shot. I can do all my distortion fixes and obviously everything else and still be very, very confident that I can print this up to an extremely high size. Real fun stuff. And, oh, look at that. It's taking a little bit on the rendering, but look at that crispness. Just across the range. Whew. Whew. Moving into the darker hours, kids. I mean, if you're with medium format, it might well be because of that fading sun and high contrast situation. As I mentioned in the review and in these Lightroom pics, we have a lot to work with on the dynamic ranges side of things. So that's all well and good. And of course, again, with the 23mm, sharp and contrasty, but I can really pull out that dynamic range. Let's go through even just a little bit more to this landscape in the fading hours of the day in Bruges along the canals, and then go into the nighttime where it really rock and rolled. And for that one, guys, in case you're curious, ISO 1000 is because I'm leaning right over the canal handheld. So, a third of a second I can manage. But I did have to boost up the ISO. And, I talk about contrasty and sharp. I think this image really has it going on. And if you look backstage, still a single raw. Provia standard film simulation, and now I've just pushed down my highlights, popped up my shadows. So if we reset those, you can see that I'm actually working with something like this with the blacks pumped down and the clarity up. We won't bother resetting those, but I think it shows you, just how contrasty this lens is and how much it still gives you to work with, even though it is nice and contrasty. Certainly retaining that dynamic range that I'm loving. And then just clicking through a little more for a couple nighttime shots just to show you what you can do with the old 23mm around Bruges, especially if you join me for a night tour as Photo Tour Bruges. This is all playing out well, and again, this is just popping up shadows and then bringing down highlights, gang. So food for thought. Oh, and this is inside the Basilica of the Holy Blood. I just wanted to load up this image to remind you guys, single RAWs are great on the GFX, but obviously when you get into extreme contrasty situations, or just if anything, you want to be sure to cover your range. Usually on a full frame camera, I'm doing 5, maybe even 7 exposures just to cover my entire range on the dynamic front. So when I use the GFX, I get 1, 2, 3 shots. I've covered my whole thing, and then I can just go to that. And I hope you're noticing, without, playing with sliders and everything, how I did correct a little bit of distortion going on there. And maybe it was for better, maybe it was for worse. I'm sure you can sound off on the comments and tell me how great or crap I am. But that's what you might be doing every now and then on this 23mm side of things. Just a little tweak on the distortion slider is not totally unusual for this, but I wouldn't say it's a standard move I have to do after I get to Lightroom with my 23mm files. And hey, indoors in HDR at the Adorna's domain, beautiful little spot, so why not feature it in this vid? Same goes for the beer experience. That one, I didn't actually take an HDR. I knew that guy could go at any time. So with the single RAW, I'm able to say edit at the end of this file with the TIFF because I took it into Nik Collection and played around on the color effects module just to be able to really pull out the most of what was available in that RAW file. And certainly with the 23mm, I had a lot to work with, as I think you can see. So Food for thought, gang. And of course, like I've mentioned a couple times, the bokeh on this thing is gorgeous and you can focus in pretty close. So if you want to do some really creative stuff, this is certainly possible. You know, you shake up your landscape by just focusing on that end of the day moisture on the cobblestones of Bruges and then let all this drop out. Very, very possible on this. And actually, to give you an idea how much flexibility you have, take a peek up in the corner where it says f13. If I drop that right down to f4, this would be just a bokeh silhouette, for lack of better words. So extremely interesting lens on that front. And creatively, sky's the limit. Stare into a puddle with this lens, see what you can do, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. And on the way out, guys, because I've already said my goodbyes in the main intro, just remember, have some good company by your side. Everything should be groovy. All right. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Comment, like, share, subscribe. More importantly, turn off the desk. Get out there, get shooting. Saying it again for good reason. Bye-bye.